since Bugatti decided early on they wasn't going to sell us any parts for this car.
We just don't think it's safe.
We've had to improvise and make everything ourselves. Today we're going to drive the Bugatti Chiron for the first time since the accident.
What does it take to make Bugatti change its mind after years of saying no? For Mat Armstrong, the answer started with 2 blacklisted VINs, 0 factory parts, and a team building everything from scratch. Custom radiators, a hand-fabricated crash bar, even a broken gearbox mount repaired using a method most people thought wouldn't work. Then came a public response from Mate Rimac, then a finished Veyron, then a road trip straight into France that ended somewhere nobody expected. Let's discuss these things one by one, because this story has 2 very different cars, 2 very different outcomes, and one surprising ending in between. Bugatti versus Mat Armstrong. Every impossible build story needs a villain, even a reluctant one, and in this case it wasn't a person. It was a decision made somewhere inside Bugatti's corporate structure, applied to 2 vehicles at once.
That car is still not repaired because Bugatti have also done the same thing and said that they will not supply parts for that vehicle because it's got to go back to France.
Mat Armstrong, a UK-based YouTuber who built his channel and an entire workshop around buying wrecked, seemingly unfixable supercars and bringing them back to life, took on not 1, but 2 Bugattis around the same period. A written-off Veyron and, separately, a crashed Chiron Pure Sport. Both cars ran into the exact same wall almost immediately. This wasn't Armstrong's first project of this kind either. He'd built his entire channel, and eventually a full workshop funded by what that channel earned, around a specific corner of automotive YouTube, buying supercars that insurers and manufacturers alike had already written off, and proving that a total loss on paper didn't have to mean gone for good in practice. Taking on 2 Bugattis at once, though, was an escalation even by his own standards. Bugatti's response wasn't neutral. It was a blacklist, the kind of decision that goes beyond simply declining to help and actively closes every official door. Once a vehicle identification number gets flagged this way, no authorized dealership anywhere in the world will sell parts against it, whether the buyer is a random enthusiast or a YouTuber with millions of viewers watching. The company's stated reasoning was straightforward. These cars, in Bugatti's assessment, could not be repaired safely or permanently. Not difficult, not expensive, simply off the table. For most owners, that would be the end of the story. A written-off hypercar with a locked VIN and no access to factory parts is, for all practical purposes, dead. A very expensive ornament, or scrap. But Armstrong had already built a reputation, and a workshop, around exactly this kind of problem. If Bugatti wouldn't sell the parts, the plan became simple in concept and brutal in execution. Build them. It's worth pausing on just how unusual that workshop itself is. This isn't a hobbyist tinkering in a garage on weekends. It's a full operation, built and funded entirely through the channel's own earnings, staffed with specialists capable of tackling problems most independent repair shops would simply turn away. Reaching that level of capability is itself the product of years of smaller, less publicized projects, each one building toward the kind of expertise that a job like this would eventually demand. That decision shaped everything that followed. Every component that would normally arrive in a branded box from Bugatti's parts network instead had to be measured, modeled, and manufactured from scratch by people who had never seen the factory originals up close, working from whatever reference material they could piece together themselves. It's one thing to repair a car using the manufacturer's own blueprints. It's another to reverse engineer a hypercar built by one of the most secretive manufacturers in the world, with the manufacturer actively uninterested in helping. The blacklist wasn't just a bureaucratic inconvenience either. It carried real financial and reputational weight. Bugatti is a company that trades heavily on precision, exclusivity, and the idea that its cars are effectively unrepairable outside of its own factory. A wrecked Bugatti quietly being restored by an outside team, using improvised parts, runs directly against that image. It's not hard to understand why the company might have preferred these particular cars simply disappear from public view, rather than reappear, rebuilt, on YouTube. Except that's exactly what was about to happen, on two fronts at once. One car belonged to Armstrong directly. The other belonged to someone else entirely. And that second car is where this story gets its sharpest edge. Rebuilding the impossible Chiron. While Armstrong's Veyron project moved forward largely under his own roof, the Chiron Per Sport belonged to somebody else, Alex Gonzalez.
It was Alex, the original guy that owned the Bugatti in the first place and crashed it. After he got paid out from insurance, it got taken to auction.
A Miami-based car enthusiast known online as FX Alex GYT. Gonzalez's Chiron Per Sport had suffered a serious front-end accident. The kind of crash that, on a car this complex, doesn't just mean cosmetic damage. Insurance estimates on the repair reportedly climbed as high as $1,700,000 on a hypercar that had cost roughly $6 million in the first place. Add in the fact that Bugatti had already flagged the VIN and refused to sell parts, and the math stopped making sense for almost anyone. Most insurers would total a car like this and move on. That's usually where cars like this disappear from public view entirely, sold off through a salvage auction, stripped for parts, or left to sit. A written-off hypercar with a manufacturer-locked VIN is about as unattractive a purchase as exists in the entire car world, because the two things a buyer would normally rely on, access to parts and access to expertise, are both taken off the table at once. Most people who could afford a car like this in the first place have no interest in taking on that kind of risk for a second time. Gonzalez didn't. And once Armstrong got involved, the project picked up a level of technical ambition that went well beyond a typical bodywork repair. A huge amount of the credit for keeping this project alive goes to one specialist in particular, Bob, from the machine shop, who took on some of the most technically demanding fabrication work in the entire build. With Bugatti unwilling to supply replacement radiators, Bob built them from scratch, not modified stand-ins, but functional replacements engineered to actually do the job a Bugatti spec radiator needs to do on a car capable of extreme speeds. Even more remarkable was the front crash bar. This is a structural component, not a cosmetic one, and Bugatti wasn't selling it. Bob spent roughly 60 hours building a replacement entirely from scratch, without ever having access to an original part to scan or directly reference. Working from whatever measurements and reference photos the team could gather, he reverse-engineered the design closely enough to include the correct mounting points and thread patterns, so the finished piece could bolt straight onto the car's chassis legs exactly the way a factory part would. That's not a minor detail. A crash bar that doesn't mount correctly, or that fails under load, isn't just an inconvenience on a car like this. It's a genuine safety concern on a vehicle designed to travel at speeds most road cars will never approach. Getting it right, without the manufacturer's help, without a factory reference, and without the ability to simply order a replacement if it came out wrong, is the kind of achievement that's easy to undersell in a quick recap, and genuinely difficult to overstate in practice. The rest of the Chiron's rebuild followed the same pattern of improvisation. The interior had to be rebuilt largely from the ground up. New airbags, a component with obvious safety implications, and not something any responsible team would casually improvise, ended up being sourced from an Audi A3, a solution that speaks to just how resourceful the team had to become when the official channel simply didn't exist. Custom radiators, courtesy of Bob, replaced the ones destroyed in the crash. None of this happened quickly, and none of it happened without real financial risk. Every part built from scratch represented hours of skilled labor that could have gone toward any other project with a guaranteed positive outcome. Every measurement taken without a factory reference carried the risk of being wrong in a way that wouldn't show up until much later in the build, when correcting it would cost even more time and money. And running underneath all of it was the same unresolved tension that had defined the project from the beginning. Bugatti still hadn't formally endorsed any of this. The company that built the car, that held the only official blueprints, that could have made every single one of these problems disappear with a phone call.
But I can't just call up Bugatti to buy new ones.
So the car would have to be on site with ourselves at any parts get ordered, you see.
So now I've got to figure out where all these parts come from.
Simply wasn't picking up. That silence, as it turned out, wasn't going to last forever, but it took a very public flashpoint to start cracking it. Mate Rimac finally speaks. Every saga like this eventually reaches a moment where the company on the other side of the silence has to say something. And for Bugatti, that moment arrived courtesy of its own parent company's leadership. Mate Rimac, the CEO overseeing Bugatti as part of the Bugatti Rimac Group, ended up addressing the Chiron Per Sport rebuild directly and publicly, after the project had generated enough attention and controversy that staying silent was no longer really an option. It wasn't a small, offhand comment either. It became significant enough that outlets covering the automotive world treated it as a genuine flashpoint in the broader saga. Part of what pushed things to that point was a specific technical crisis the team hit partway through the rebuild. 2 significant tears discovered in the transmission mounts. This wasn't a cosmetic problem or a minor annoyance. It was the kind of structural issue that, left unresolved, could genuinely compromise the car. Armstrong, by his own account, effectively put out a public plea for support at that stage. An acknowledgement that the improvised, from-scratch approach was reaching the edge of what an outside team could realistically solve without any manufacturer input at all. That's roughly the moment things started to shift. According to later reporting, Rimac's involvement didn't stay purely critical. Bugatti eventually lifted the parts blacklist that had been in place on the Chiron's identification number, and the company also reduced its own repair cost estimates for the car. A quiet but meaningful reversal from a company that had, up to that point, treated the project as something closer to a lost cause than a legitimate repair. There was an unexpected wrinkle in how that involvement actually began, too. According to later reporting, Rimac had quietly been watching the project unfold online well before he ever addressed it publicly, a detail that reframes the company's earlier silence a little. It wasn't necessarily pure indifference from Bugatti's side. It may have simply been a wait-and-see approach coming from the very top of the organization, long before anyone outside the company knew he was paying attention at all. Solving the transmission mount damage wasn't a single decision either. Early plans centered on 3-dimensionally scanning the failed bracket, converting that scan into a digital model, and having it machined into an improved replacement. A slower, more exacting process than a straightforward weld, but one aimed at producing something closer to a properly engineered part. Around the same period, the team also sent the car's exhaust system off to a specialist called Valvetronic for scanning, part of a longer-term plan to eventually produce a bespoke, louder exhaust for the finished car. One of the more striking technical moments to come out of this period involved the gearbox mount, a component deliberately engineered to break in a crash. That's not a design flaw, it's intentional. The mount is meant to fail on purpose, redirecting crash forces through the rest of the car's structure and limiting wider damage elsewhere. The trade-off is that even a relatively minor impact can snap it, and a factory replacement, when available at all, comes at an extraordinary price.
£20,000 service is 18,000 plus VAT.
37,800.
To about $25,000.
Rather than pay that price or wait indefinitely for Bugatti to reconsider, a specialist on the team TIG welded the broken mount back together. A repair that a lot of people following the project assumed simply wasn't possible on a part specifically designed to be sacrificial. Getting a part like that welded, tested, and trusted again on a car meant to travel at extreme speed is the kind of repair that either works completely or doesn't get attempted at all, and this one reportedly held. None of this turned Bugatti into an enthusiastic partner overnight. Even with the blacklist lifted and estimates reduced, the Chiron Pour Sport remained, and still remains as of the most recent reporting, an unfinished project. Genuinely close in some respects, but without a confirmed completion date. What changed wasn't the finish line. What changed was the tone. A company that had spent months treating this build as something to be ignored or dismissed had, for the first time, engaged with it directly, on the record, in a way that acknowledged the seriousness of what Armstrong and his team were actually attempting. That shift in tone on the Chiron side set the stage for something that happened next. Not with the Chiron at all, but with the other car Armstrong had been quietly working on the entire time. The Veyron that changed everything. While the Chiron Pour Sport saga played out in public, with its controversy and its Rimac response and its ongoing, unresolved status, Armstrong's other project had been progressing on its own, quieter timeline. The written-off Veyron that Armstrong had taken on reached a milestone the Chiron still hasn't hit. It became genuinely drivable. That's a significant distinction in a project like this. A car being drivable isn't the same as a car being finished down to every last detail, but it represents the point where months or years of blacklisted parts, improvised fabrication, and uncertain outcomes finally translate into something you can actually start, drive, and trust to hold together under real conditions. Getting a rebuilt hypercar to that point of trust matters more than it might sound. This isn't a car that only needs to survive a short trip around the block. Driving it internationally, across borders, on unfamiliar roads for hours at a time, means every improvised part, every from-scratch fabrication, and every judgment call made without a factory reference had to actually work together under sustained, real-world conditions, not just start once in a workshop and get parked again. Reaching that point on a hypercar that Bugatti had written off entirely, without the manufacturer's parts network, without official blueprints, and without any guarantee that the approach would even work, represents the culmination of the same kind of resourceful, improvised engineering that defined the Chiron project. Proof, in a very literal sense, that Bugatti's original assessment that these cars simply couldn't be fixed wasn't the only possible outcome. Armstrong didn't just get the Veyron running and park it in the workshop either. He took it on a road trip to France, a decision that's hard to read as anything other than deliberate. France is where Bugatti's factory sits, where the company's identity as a manufacturer is most concentrated, and where a car like this, built back from a total write-off by an outside team the company had spent years refusing to help, would be about as visible a statement as it's possible to make without saying a single word about it. That drive put Armstrong and his team in the same general area as Bugatti's operations, at a particular moment, one that happened to coincide with Bastille Day, a public holiday in France. It's the kind of timing that could easily have meant nothing at all, a rebuilt car passing through a region on an ordinary trip, no different from any other stop on the route. Instead, it turned into the moment the entire multi-year relationship between Armstrong and Bugatti actually started to shift. A representative from the company met with Armstrong's team during that visit. Given everything that had come before, the blacklist, the refusals, the years of silence, the public controversy over the Chiron, that alone would have been notable. What made it more than notable was what came out of the meeting, an invitation for Armstrong and his team to visit the Bugatti factory properly, scheduled for September. That's not a small gesture from a company that had spent years treating this entire saga.
Yeah. No, so we need to organize. I would say in September.
Yep.
For you to visit.
No, that's exciting. I'm well happy about that.
As something to be kept at arm's length. A factory visit isn't just a friendly meeting in a parking lot. It's an invitation into the exact institution that had built both of these cars in the first place, extended to the person the company had spent years actively working against. The Bugatti blacklist finally cracks. According to the reporting that followed, this was likely the first genuinely positive feedback Armstrong had received from Bugatti throughout the entire saga. Not a grudging acknowledgement buried in a press statement, not a lifted blacklist justified purely on liability grounds, but an actual invitation, offered directly, to come inside. It's worth being precise about what this moment does and doesn't represent. It's not confirmation that Bugatti now officially endorses either rebuild. It's not a signal that the company plans to start selling parts against either blacklisted VIN going forward. And critically, it has nothing to do with the Chiron Pur Sport's completion. That car, Alex Gonzalez's car, the one that sparked Mate Rimac's public response and the eventual reduction in repair estimates, remains unfinished as of the most recent reporting, still without a confirmed date for when it will actually be complete. What the invitation does represent is something narrower, but genuinely meaningful. A company that spent years refusing to engage on any level chose for the first time to open a door rather than close one. Whether that turns into an ongoing relationship, a one-time gesture, or something else entirely, won't be clear until September actually arrives, and that factory visit either happens or doesn't. It's also worth remembering how small the gesture technically is, set against how large it feels. A meeting during a road trip and an invitation for later in the year cost Bugatti almost nothing in concrete terms. No parts shipped, no official repair support committed, no public statement retracting years of refusal. And yet, against the backdrop of everything that came before it, that small gesture is the first thing in this entire saga that reads as Bugatti meeting Armstrong even part way.
You're not paying for the actual job of taking it off and putting it back on again. You're paying for the experience and the knowledge to know how to do it and the tools to do it,
rather than simply tolerating his existence from a distance. There's something fitting about how these two cars have ended up defining two completely different chapters of the same larger story. The Chiron Pur Sport is the one that generated the headlines, the CEO response, the public back and forth, and it's still not done. The Veyron is the one that quietly got finished, drove itself to France, and ended up being the car that actually cracked the door open. Neither outcome makes the other less significant. If anything, they make more sense side by side than either one would on its own. One project proving the technical case that these cars could be saved, the other proving that persistence eventually gets noticed, even by a company that spent years insisting it wouldn't. For anyone who's followed the saga from the beginning, there's a certain irony in how it's unfolded. The louder, more public project, the one with the CEO statement, the controversy, the constant scrutiny, is still grinding through its final stages. The quieter one, built largely out of the spotlight while all that noise was happening elsewhere, is the one that ended up standing in front of the factory gates. It's a reminder that in a saga this long, the moment that actually changes things isn't always the one everyone's watching most closely. For a saga that started with a blacklist and a flat refusal, ending up with a scheduled factory visit is not a small shift. It's the first real sign, after years of silence, that Bugatti might be willing to see this entire project as something other than a problem to be ignored. None of it changes what the next few months still need to prove. September will either bring a real, substantive conversation between Armstrong's team and the people who actually built these cars, or it will turn out to be a friendly, but ultimately symbolic gesture that doesn't lead anywhere further. Either way, the Chiron Pur Sport will still need to get finished on its own timeline, with or without whatever comes out of that factory visit. Two cars, two very different endings, so far. The Chiron is still not finished, still grinding through its final stages after years of controversy. The Veyron is the one that quietly got there first, drove itself into France, and somehow ended up cracking a door that had stayed shut for years. Neither story is fully over. September will tell us whether that factory invitation actually means something, or whether it was just a friendly gesture that goes nowhere. If you've been following this build, tell us which car you think finishes first in the comments. Hit like if this turnaround surprised you, and subscribe for the next update.